welcome back to the workshop. Today's review is on the Makita KP0800 power planer. So this is an 82mm wide planer, 620 watt motor, 17,000 RPMs, and it can take up to a 2.5mm deep cut. So it's a pretty standard planer. It's Makita's smallest planer. They have a lot of bigger ones, right up to full-size carpentry ones. But it may be the smallest. It still has plenty of power as long as you're only using it for a half or 1 mil passes, which really I can't ever find a use for doing more than a 1mm, maybe a 1.5mm pass, because they just aren't as clean and precise as doing a 1 or a 0.5mm pass. It's just usually when I'm using a planer, I want to get a nice smooth finish like that. So I will take a lot of shallow passes, and it usually gives a much better result and is much more precise. So I've had this for about 2 years, and I bought this to upgrade from my cordless DeWalt planer. I'm not going to go into too much detail about why I wanted a corded planer, mainly because I think that's for another video, the advantages of having a corded power planer over a cordless. Like I said, it's a pretty standard planer. It's light. It has great ergonomics. The handle, as you can see, is pretty low to the planer and is kind of slanted back. And I find that really easy to hold. It's much easier to hold onto the wood. The trigger is easy to pull. It's nice and small. The only thing that might be a downside is the lock button is just on the one side. So if you were holding this with your left hand, it might be a little more difficult to push the lock button, but for me, I'm right-handed. It's really easy to just push it and pull the trigger. So the dial knob, you have 0.1 mil increments on there, and you can go all the way up to 2.5 mil depth of cut. I don't actually think I've ever really used that, aside from maybe once just seeing if it could do it, which it could. So you have a dust port on this side. It's a pretty big dust port. None of the vacuums I have will fit on it without an adapter or tape. I kind of don't like hooking the vacuum up to my planers anyway. I prefer to just let them spew all over the floor, because I find as soon as I hook a vacuum up, I'm always tipping towards the vacuum. So the base, it's a nice base. Nice and machined. You have a V here for doing chamfers and stuff. And by the way, this can do up to a 9 mil chamfer here. You have, this is a pretty nifty little feature right here. You have this is the shoe, so that when you put it down, your blades are not touching the bench. But this one is spring-loaded, so it just snaps up and then it snaps down, whereas other planers, it is not spring-loaded. So that is pretty handy, and at first, when I first got this planer, I thought that was going to be a bit annoying, but no, this is a great little feature right here. It always works, and that way your blades are never touching the bench. The blades, they're just normal planer blades. There's 2 of them. And they're the disposable type rather than sharpenable blades, which I suppose for most people is probably going to be an advantage, because sharpening planer blades, I imagine, is a bit of an art. Up here you have the knob for locking in your edge guide. I haven't really used that much, but I'll show that in just a minute. The cord, this is the only downside, is the cord isn't really long. I think it's like only 2 meters or something, but at least it's a nice flexible cord. As you can see, it's nice and flexible, unlike other power tools that have a hard, not so flexible cord. But it could be a little longer. And speaking of the cord, using a corded planer, like today I was planing 4.5 meter long wood. I don't really notice it trailing behind me. I kind of just have gotten used to having a cord, and I'd much rather have a cord trailing behind me than going through batteries and having to charge batteries and dealing with all the disadvantages of having a battery on a high draw tool. But for me, I don't mind the cord. The build quality on this is pretty good. We have the rubber overmolding, which I've talked about rubber overmolding before. I'm not the biggest fan of it. I much prefer when tools are like this with no rubber overmolding, just hard plastic. But whatever, it's there. It is the usual Makita quality. For those of you who like to know the plastic, it is PCGF15 shell with a TPE overmolding. They even put Makita into the molding. The brushes, you just change, the one is there, and the other one you have to take the dust port off to get to, but that makes changing the brushes really easy. And I should mention about brushes, because I know that some people who are trying to sell brushless tools will go on about how you don't have to change the brushes on brushless tools. And although that is true, of all the tools I have, I've never had to change the brushes. Even my palm sander, my angle grinder, the planer, I've never had to change the brushes on them. So, changing brushes, yes, you will have to do it if you use your tools all day, every day, but it is a rare occurrence. It's not like every other time you pick the tool up, you're going to have to change the brushes. And there are, for me, the advantages of how simple brushed motors are over brushless. I'll take a brushed any day. Not to mention, corded tools, you pretty much only have the option of brushed anyway. So we have an aluminum housing here, and the base is obviously aluminum. And then in here is the belt, which appears to be a pretty good quality belt. But if that ever wears out, you can just simply take that screw out and change it. It's no big deal. So mine came in the Mac pack, which the Mac packs are a pretty good box. I kind of like them over the DeWalt T-Stack because they're square inside, although the DeWalt T-Stacks are definitely a much tougher box. But anyway, inside we have the usual cheap Makita excuse for an insert, which, yeah, Makita really scrimps on the inserts they put in these boxes, but whatever. If it breaks, you can just replace it with foam. So the edge guide is probably one of the better edge guides that will come with planers. So just, I'll show you that in a minute. And then you also get your blade changing wrench, which that is a pretty nice wrench. You can't store it on the tool, but for the amount of times you're going to change blades, that doesn't bother me. So the edge guide, just loosen that off, put it in. And what's nice about this edge guide is, first off, it actually sits almost parallel with the base of the planer. And you have this little foot here so that it doesn't touch your blades. And yet when you have this on, it covers the blades. So if you are using this, like say you're using it on the edge of something, you can't put your hands into the blade. So that is pretty handy. So this is a pretty nice planer, at least I think. It's well built and it leaves a nice finish. It has decent power. It's precise. Now, most of the precision and also the surface finish of the wood that a power planer is going to give you depends on the guy using the planer and also how sharp the blades are. I have this tendency to kind of run all my blades and all my cutting tools until they basically can be run no more. But really, a set of planer blades is $10 or something like that. So, I mean, you really shouldn't shy away from flipping them now and then. Like, I just flipped the blades on this today, and the surface finish is so much nicer than it was before. But for those curious, the shoe is pretty much parallel from the front to back. At least in my books, that's good enough. So anyway, it's a nice tool. Hopefully, I have no idea how well the motor's built and how long it's going to last, but being that it's a Makita and being the amount of work I've put on it so far, I'd say it's a pretty well built motor. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.